This kind of was inspired by our Instagram challenge, Sun-Kissed Yogi. So I'm today's pose, which is splits. So this is the perfect tie-in. So I want to start with splits because, like I said, this is kind of an introduction to it, and then we'll talk about how else we find hamstring release. So in full splits, and if you watched my video on my Instagram page, I always like to start in down dog. And like I said, your down dog may not look like this. Your down dog may look like this. You can still press the chest back and get the weight out of the wrist, but the hamstrings aren't open. So eventually the hamstrings will open. The heels will be able to lower all the way down. But from here, I sweep one leg up and back. I step it through for lunge. So in lunge, I'm already starting to find length. I'm going to find a lengthening through this left hip flexor, lengthen forward through the crown of the head. And then I like to start in half splits. So I drop the back knee down and then send the hips up and back. So the trick here is to keep this at 90 degrees. It's not a sitting back, it's a drawing back and tilting the tailbone up. So I start to find an opening and release here and a lengthening through the hamstring. So even in half splits, I'm hugging the midline. I'm thinking about drawing this heel back into the hip, and then I use that to lengthen and elongate the spine. So like we talked about, if the hamstrings are tight, you may not have found this lower back release. So start to find that work and opening here. Reaching the heart forward, lengthening through the crown of the head, and then take the rounding out of it. Instead, you're going to lead with the chest and the chin to bring it forward and down. So not rounding. Even if you don't lower it down as much, you want to keep the length, leading with the chest and the chin to melt it forward and down. From here, feel this release, tilting the tailbone, hugging the midline, keeping the hips square, and then when you're ready, you would work into splits. So your splits may not look like this. Matter of fact, they probably aren't going to be if you tuned in because you have not found this release and surrender. And like I said, it took me years to get to this moment, and it's still something that I practice on. So if your splits start to look like this, that's okay. So work it here. Go work to your edge. So there's a difference between having it hurt and having it be uncomfortable. Find your level of discomfort that you're ready to work at for that day and really meet up with that tension and the blockage. So from there, hold here, breathe into it. Just get comfortable with whatever you are. Let go of the outcome of the splits and just really surrender to the process. From here, maybe you take a slight bend to that right knee and bring the hips a little more forward and down. Maybe start to walk the hands back, lift the chest up a little higher. So what we're doing here, we're actually pulling the stretch out of the hamstring and instead finding a lengthening and opening through this left hip flexor. So it's this hip flexor and this hamstring that have to open before I can lower all the way down. So after I take a few breaths here, maybe now send the hips a little more forward and down. I'm going to keep the hips where they are and then send this right heel forward. Maybe it only comes forward an inch. But even in that inch, you've moved it a little bit more and now we're opening back through the hamstring. So I work on straightening this leg back and pulling the stretch back to here. So you would work this a couple times. Maybe bend back into the knee, melt the hips deeper, send the hips a little farther forward, straighten the leg. Eventually, you're able to completely relax and surrender into splits. So here's the thing, even if the hamstrings are open, this left hip flexor is open, but what tends to happen is you start to find the hips want to bypass, and the hamstring want to bypass the work. So I'm going to switch sides just to one, keep myself even, and two, I think this will be a better way to kind of demo. So I'm keeping the hips square, meaning my hips are evenly pointing down to the earth, and I'm hugging the midline. So for me, my left hamstring is always a little bit tighter, so it's totally normal to feel one side of the body more open or tight than the other, and that's okay. It just gives us another reason to come to the mat and practice and see if we can start to even everything out. So from here, even if you can lower all the way down, I'm keeping the hips square. So what tends to happen is that this hip starts to rotate open, and we feel like we're able to lower down deeper, but we're actually bypassing this work. I'm bypassing the hip stretch. I'm actually not even into this hip flexor, and my hips are splaying open. So on splits, the hips stay square. So press down, lift up, draw this left hip back in my case. Right hip rolls forward and down, and I hug the midline to lower. So I can keep these back toes tucked to really work on squaring. And then eventually, as you melt the chest forward, I also like to keep the hip flexed. I bring the opposite hand to the outside of the foot, and then rest this back arm behind me. And what I'm thinking here is about drawing this left hip back, reaching the heart forward, finding length again through the torso, and then leading with the chest and chin to melt it forward and down. Feeling a big left hamstring stretch here. So again, hugging the midline, drawing in, extending out, and finding length. Eventually, you can completely relax and surrender into the pose. And there's a lot of variations you can do from here. You can start adding back bends, pigeon grips. It's really fun. So what that would look like is this comes back. I reach back, rotate the chest open. So again, this is after years of practice, but I start to surrender and find freedom into the pose. So let's think about now how we get here. So again, the hamstrings, you have to surrender to them. You cannot muscle through it. You have to just be able to really relax and open yourself up to it. So if any of this is making sense to you, or if you've had any aha moments, even now, if this is helpful, tap the screen right now and give a bunch of hearts so that I know if I'm on the right track. I want to make sure that I'm here and I'm serving you. Caitlin is giving me a nod, so I'm hoping that this is of service to somebody. And like I said, as we move through this, you'll pick up little pieces that you can take back into your practice. So it's not about really accomplishing the split tomorrow, but it's about finding those little areas where you can find a little more space and freedom and surrender into your practice and take that back with you. And then again, move it back into the bigger, progress that is your practice. So moving from splits, we're going to talk about different ways to open the hamstrings. So for me in the beginning of class, my hamstring stretch start with my forward folds. So what I teach in my classes and what I teach to my teacher trainers is that there are really only so many poses in yoga. But what tends to happen is we start to change the plane of motion so that the body is active and challenged differently, even though the formation of it looks very similar. So for instance, in splits, right, I can take them from the ground, I can take them lying on back, I can take them into a standing split, I can even come and take them into the handstand. So all those poses are related with the splits, and I use the same principles that I learn in each one to find different openings. Same with a forward fold, which is how I start to find a release to the hamstrings. So when I come to the first forward fold of the day, right, I may be here. Maybe for some of you, these hands are not going to touch. I know they did not for me, so I'm going to move back. Caitlin, am I in? Good alignment. Okay, good. So they may not. So this is where you use blocks. It is not cheating to use blocks if you need them. Blocks are not crutches. I think that's a misconception. Blocks are tools for you to actually put the work back in therapeutically where you need to find a release. So please use blocks if you need. They're great. If you don't have blocks, your shins are available. So even if you cannot touch, doesn't matter. The work is still here for you to do. So when I first started, I couldn't. Now I can. Now I can place the palms totally flat. But again, years of practice. So what I'm thinking about in my forward fold to release through my hamstrings. Number one, if the hamstrings are tight, what tends to happen is we start to shift back our weight. But what happens when we shift back, we're actually activating our hamstrings. And we need to find a release. Our hamstrings need to actually be able to relax so that they can find that opening and lengthening through them. So what happens is I shift the weight forward. I'm going to press the weight into the balls of the As I ground down evenly through the four corners, I'm going to think about pressing down to the big toe mounts, and I'm going to start to inner spiral the thighs. So my thighs are going to start to roll together and back. And as I shift the weight forward, light through the heels, relax the hamstrings, I start to engage the thighs. So by activating the thighs or the quadriceps, my hamstrings naturally have to release. Both cannot be active at the same time. So by drawing the focus here, I am naturally relaxing here. So now I can take the focus out of the hamstrings and just work on opening through them. So as I shift the weight forward, press the balls of the feet, inner spiral, engage the thighs, and then I'm going to use this upward rising energy to start to use the abs. So this is drawing in, I'm using the navels, and I'm using the abs to tilt the tailbone up. By tilting the tailbone up, I'm again lengthening through here and finding a bigger stretch. And then I'm using the abs, keeping the long spine to bring the chest forward and then down. So does everyone see that? Was that helpful? If yes, give hearts, give a tap. Is this already kind of helping? Maybe this is reaching some of you. Yes, Caitlin's giving me big thumbs up. Good, so we're on the right track, working through this together. So from here, again, this may not look like this for you, but eventually you can surrender here. If you'd like to add some variation, there's hands to feet, both from the front and the back. So from the front, hands would come in between. I like to take a 2-fist width just so you can make sure that my feet come underneath my hips. I pick up the front of the feet. I slide the palms underneath, facing up, toes rest and decrease the wrist. I again lengthen out, shift the weight forward, become light through the heels, and then I use the abs pulling up on the feet to melt the chest forward and then down. I keep the rounding out of the upper back, shoulders away from the ears. So my lengthening through the crown of the head as the elbows come slightly forward and out. Even though I'm stepping over the back of the hands, I'm pressing evenly through the four corners, grounding through the big toe mounts, inner spiraling the thighs, tilting the tailbone, and seeing if I can melt it a little deeper. Maybe release, pulse out, find length, and then melt again. So you've got hands to feet from the front. To deepen it, you're going to bring the feet together, hands to feet from behind. This time you bend the knees, bring the chest onto the thighs, pick up the heels, slide the palms underneath facing up. So the forearms are going to wrap around the calves, keep the chest glued, and you work on straightening through the legs. Again, chest stays glued, but the forehead may not work into the shins yet. Maybe the knees are bent here. That's okay. You're working to your level and your understanding of the pose as it is to you in your practice at the moment. Again, eventually the legs come straight and I'm able to melt it forward and down. Finding a release here, tilting the tailbone, lifting up, maybe finding a little more space, and then bringing it deeper. So that's how it starts standing for me. At the end of the practice, we bring that same pose sitting. So as I sit, I wiggle the hips, get onto the sit bones, I grow tall, I reach the arms up. So I draw the shoulder blades down, lengthen through the crown of the head, navel is drawing in and up, lower ribs are pulling together and back. I find length through the crown of the head, and on the exhale, I use the abs, I send the hips back, same principles, and bring it forward and down. Maybe it's a 2-finger grip, maybe I grab the outside of the feet, or maybe I take a wrist bind underneath the soles. If this is nowhere accessible, you start grabbing hold, again, of your tools. So you've got a strap, maybe you've got a towel, maybe you've got a tie or belt, doesn't matter. You have something that you can bring underneath the soles of the feet to find length. So I'm not worried about being here. This is a false sense of, look, I've got my toes. Less about this, more about finding length and release through the hamstrings, so wherever you are. And then same principles I had standing, I'm gonna bring sitting. So as I flex the toes back to the body, I'm pressing evenly through the four corners, but I'm thinking about grounding through the big toe mounts, inner spiraling the thighs, so drawing the inner thighs together and down, sending the hips back, reaching forward the heart, and with a long spine, I'm coming forward, and then more forward and down. So you work this. This is going to find a different, even though it's a similar pose, it's going to find a little bit of a different opening because now you're supported by the ground. I'm engaging the thighs, drawing this back, releasing the hamstrings. Again, thighs engaged, hamstrings relaxed. And I'm starting to find a little bit of a different stretch. From here, I'm going to bring splits lying down. So start with drawing one knee in. If you know you needed the strap and you have tight hamstrings, bring it with you. I'll demo that as well. So I'm going to keep the thigh close into the chest and then grabbing behind the calf, ankle, or foot, or using towel, strap, tie, belt, whatever you've got, you can bring it underneath the sole. Doesn't matter, you need to keep the leg straight. So use a tool or a strap if you need. And so I'm going to grab underneath my foot only because I have the flexibility. So you're going to work to your level and understanding of the pose as it is in your practice today. And with this thigh close, you extend the leg straight. So again, you want to keep the hips square. Whatever happened in splits, when you practice that with that open rotation of the hip, is most likely going to happen here as well. Those same patterns, until you break them, are going to start mimicking themselves into the same posture, even though you've changed the plane of motion. So from here, I think about dropping this right hip down and away. I relax the hamstring, I find space behind the knee, and I extend through the heel as I engage the thigh and then use this energy, navel pulling in and up, to use the abs to pull it close. You'll notice if any tension starts to build up around the head, neck, and shoulders. You can shrug the shoulders up to the ears, glide them together and down. And then think about pressing the back of the shoulders and hips evenly into the earth. Send the tailbone back to that back foot. So in my case, that left heel. And as I think about actively pressing that left heel back, I can extend the right heel a little farther forward. To deepen, keep the hips pressing. Maybe you take a slight bend to that right knee. Pull the thigh even closer into the chest. You're going to keep that there, and then again, use the abs, straighten the leg back out. So do that a few times. Again, each time, maybe bringing it just a little bit deeper. Not a big release, but just small little motions and movements, moving that pendulum away. The last stretch I'm going to give you here is an active release technique. If you had a partner, excuse me, I've been sick, they would actually face you. They would take a stance and press both hands here and give you a sounding board to press his heel away. If you don't, you again use a talar strap and bring it underneath the sole of the foot. So, or underneath and then behind the ankle. So I'm going to hold on to this as I'm going to keep the hips flat. So that right hip is drawing away, tailbone is lengthening. And if you had a partner, again, they would hold here and give you something to actively press against. So this time I'm engaging the hamstring. I'm thinking about initiating the press from the belly of the hamstring. From there, I start to think about pressing that right heel away. So the right heel is lengthening and I'm pressing this leg back away from me actively. I hold here for a few breaths, using as much tension as I can, and then I release. I either use the towel or strap to pull it closer, or my partner is going to gently press it a little bit farther. My hips stay flat on the mat, my tailbone is long. I hold there for a breath or two. Then I start it again and repeat it. I actively engage this right hamstring, and I use the hamstring to press the leg away. I'm hugging the midline, making sure the hips are square, shoulders away from the ears, everything else pressing evenly into the earth. And then I stop, relax, and pull it a little closer. Take a few breaths. And then repeat a third time. Engage and activate the hamstring. Actively press that right leg away from you. You're still lengthening through the left, hugging the midline. And then you'll stop, release, and see if you can pull it a little closer. So you notice even in my hamstring flexibility, even using that active press and release technique, I'm able to bring it just a little farther. Hold it for one more breath, bring it maybe a little closer, hold or deepen. And on the exhale, release, lengthen out of leg and hips, send that right heel farther away, and maybe this time the right heel lands slightly past the left. And you repeat it on the left side.